Mad Max 2 wasn't just a sequel, it was a war. 200 stunts, 80 custom vehicles, half of them destroyed by the end of filming. A stuntman who broke his leg on camera and whose accident George Miller kept in the final cut. And the man who crashed the tanker in the climax wasn't a stuntman.
But the first step, defend the fuel.
He was a truck driver from Sydney who'd never been on a film set in his life. 14 things you need to know about the film that invented the post-apocalypse. 1. The truck driver who wasn't a stuntman. The Mack truck crash that ends Mad Max 2, the rolling, jackknifing, dust-exploding climax of the entire film, was performed by a man named Dennis Williams. Dennis Williams was not a stuntman. He was a truck driver from St. Peter's, Sydney, who had hauled equipment out to Broken Hill for the production and was hired for the crash because he was the only person on set who knew how to drive a quad-axle Mack. He had never heard of George Miller. When the crew told him Mel Gibson was the film's star, he said, "Is he a truckie?" They said no, he'd just graduated from drama school. Williams decided that settled it. Gibson couldn't do this. He could. The stunt driver was ordered not to eat for 12 hours before the crash in case he needed emergency surgery. When the Mack went off-road and flipped, dirt blasted through the open windscreen and hit Williams hard in the chest. The crew waited for the dust to settle before they ran to the cab. When they reached him, he was alive and uninjured. Miller later described the footage as breathtaking. And Williams later said 2 words, shit and fuck. 2. The broken leg kept in the final cut. In the scene where a motorcycle raider attacks a car, stuntman Guy Norris was supposed to clear the vehicle entirely. His leg clipped the car frame instead. The resulting tumble through the air was completely unintended. George Miller, watching through the camera, saw something he had not planned for and could not manufacture. He kept it. Norris broke his femur. He was ferried by ambulance to hospital. Miller, who was a practicing medical doctor before he became a filmmaker and had treated road accident victims in Queensland emergency rooms before he ever made a film, examined Norris on location before the ambulance arrived. Norris recovered. He went on to have one of the longest stunt careers in Australian cinema. Decades later, he returned as supervising stunt coordinator on Mad Max Fury Road and personally drove the war rig for its own climactic crash. The man who broke his leg in Mad Max 2 became the man who choreographed the stunts in Fury Road. 3. The doctor behind the camera. George Miller was a qualified medical doctor before he was a filmmaker. He worked in emergency medicine in Queensland, treating victims of car accidents on a regular basis. He later said the violence he witnessed in that work directly shaped the visual language of the Mad Max films. The specific physics of bodies and crashes, the actual look of trauma. The first Mad Max shoot nearly broke him. 2 crew members broke their legs in a motorcycle accident on the way to work before a single frame was shot. Miller almost quit on the spot. "We haven't even started," he said. "And people are gonna die." He didn't quit, but he carried that tension with him into every production decision he ever made after that. Which is why Mad Max 2 has over 200 stunts and almost no one died making it. The doctor who understood exactly what could go wrong was in charge of every sequence where it might. 4. The most expensive set in Australian cinema history. The oil refinery compound, the fortress at the center of the film, the thing everyone is fighting over, was built from scratch on location in the outback. At the time of production, it was the most expensive set ever constructed for an Australian film. The budget for Mad Max 2 was $4.5 million, more than 10 times what the original Mad Max had cost. Most of that money went into the compound, the vehicles, and the stunt work, and the location itself almost wasn't Broken Hill. Early discussions placed the production at the coast, and which Hayes pointed out would have meant boat battles, and then at a salt pan, which producer Byron Kennedy rejected because a rainy day could have sunk the entire compound into the ground. Broken Hill survived on mining infrastructure, welding equipment, skilled tradespeople, a French restaurant. George Miller said that of all the locations he could have chosen, it was the one that made the impossible production actually possible. 5. The sand in the tanker. 30 years of people watching this film. One fact that keeps catching them. The tanker isn't carrying oil. It never was. The entire climactic chase, every death, every sacrifice, every desperate mile of the road, is fought over a truck full of sand. The settlers loaded the real fuel into oil drums hidden inside their vehicles and sent Max ahead in the tanker as a decoy. When Max crashes and the tanker splits open, sand pours out. The film shows him realizing it in real time, running his hand through the stream of sand, raising it to his face, watching it fall through his fingers. The gyro captain pulls up alongside him and grins. All of it was a diversion. The outline says this was a secret kept from the cast. That's not what the film shows. The settlers knew the plan, and Max was chosen specifically because he could drive the truck. He was used. He was also saved by it. The sand is in the script, on screen, and unmistakable. It's the most devastating punchline in action cinema. 6. 200 stunts, 12 weeks. Mad Max 2 was written and shot in under 1 calendar year. Principal photography ran for 12 weeks during the winter of 1981 in the Australian outback. During those 12 weeks, more than 200 stunts were performed. 80 custom vehicles were built or modified for the production. Roughly half of them were demolished before filming wrapped. The camera operators worked inside reinforced steel housings bolted to vehicles. Units the crew named Ned Kelly's, after the notorious Australian bushranger famous for his improvised iron armor. Miller himself tried to operate a car-mounted camera rig for one sequence, got into the vehicle, and hit the wrong buttons on the first take. He was immediately replaced. The film that looks like it took years to design was done in 12 weeks. The apocalypse was built on a mining town schedule. 7. The dog saved the day before the Australian cattle dog, Max's companion, the creature whose death is arguably the film's most emotionally effective moment, was found at a local pound the day before he was scheduled to be euthanized. He came into the production with 24 hours left. The specific quality that makes Dog work on screen, the alert, watchful presence, the sense of an animal that has learned to survive at the edge of things, was not trained in. It was already there. The production found a dog that had already been abandoned by the world and put him in a film about what it means to keep going anyway. After filming, Dog was adopted by crew members and lived out his life away from the desert and the cars. 8. Now, the costumes came from secondhand shops. Norma Morrisseau built the entire visual language of the wasteland from things people had thrown away. She raided secondhand shops, surplus stores, and sporting goods outlets. Wes's shoulder pads were repurposed football gear. Leather pieces were scuffed with sandpaper and soaked in grease. The hockey mask on Humongous was chosen because it was cheap, it was modern, and it looked like a face that had forgotten how to be human. The aesthetic that spawned decades of post-apocalyptic cinema, every dystopian look from the 1980s onward, every leather and spikes wasteland warrior in fiction, film, and music was assembled from junk. Morrisseau received an Academy Award nomination for her costume work on Mad Max, Beyond Thunderdome. The visual template she built here was done without a design budget and with whatever she could find. 9. The silent film inside an action movie. Mel Gibson has 16 lines of dialogue in Mad Max 2. Across a film that runs just over 90 minutes, the protagonist speaks 16 times. Miller and co-writer Terry Hayes built Max as a figure in the tradition of Sergio Leone's Man with No Name, a mythic archetype rather than a conventional lead. Someone who communicates through movement and decision rather than speech. The effect is that the film functions almost as a silent movie in its action sequences. Miller later said the film's closest relatives weren't other action films, but the great silent action serials, physical cinema, where everything is conveyed in the body's relationship to space and speed. Roger Ebert called it a film of pure kinetic energy. What he was responding to, partly, was the absence of the thing most films rely on. Mad Max 2 demonstrates that you don't need a character to speak in order for the audience to care desperately whether he lives. 10. The refinery was blown up for real. The destruction of the refinery compound at the end of the film was a live detonation conducted under military supervision. No miniatures, no optical effects. The compound the production had spent months, and most of the budget building was destroyed in one controlled explosion sequence. Miller was so committed to the reality of what was on screen that he chose to blow up the actual set rather than simulate it. The crew watched the compound they had lived and worked in for months go up. One account describes the atmosphere on set that day as similar to watching the moon landing. A mixture of awe and the specific sadness of something irreversible. The set existed. It was destroyed. The footage of its destruction is the footage in the film. 11. Spielberg hired Miller because of this film. When Mad Max 2 reached Steven Spielberg, he didn't treat it as a genre curiosity. He treated it as evidence of a major filmmaker. He hired Miller to direct one of the 4 segments of Twilight Zone, the movie, specifically the Nightmare at 30,000 Feet sequence. It was Miller's first American directing work, a direct consequence of what Spielberg saw in the chase sequences of a low-budget Australian desert film. Joe Dante, who directed another segment of the same film, told a story about approaching Miller after seeing Mad Max 2 to ask about the sun shifting positions between shots in the chase sequence. How did Miller deal with the continuity? Miller's answer: he understood that in a relentlessly fast action sequence, no audience has ever noticed a sun position change. Spielberg saw it. Dante noticed it. The film that did it had cost $4.5 million. 12. The mask that never came off. Lord Humongous, the Lord of the Wasteland, the Ayatollah of rock and rolla, was played by Kjell Nielsen, a Swedish bodybuilder and actor. George Miller's instruction to Nielsen was that the audience should never see his face. The character's power depended entirely on the hockey mask, the absence of a face, the blankness where a human being should have been. The hockey mask was not a considered design choice. It was the cheapest available option that achieved the effect Miller needed: modern, recognizable, and completely inhuman. Something that could have been ripped from any rink and worn by something that used to be a man. By some accounts, Miller extended the instruction beyond filming. Cast and crew encountering Nielsen were not supposed to see his face outside of the character. Whether or not that held in practice, the intention was clear. Keep the mystery intact. Make the actors feel it for real. What we know for certain is that the mask never comes off in the film. Humongous dies anonymous. 13. The Interceptor was the same car, the last of the V8 Interceptors. The Pursuit Special, the black supercharged Ford Falcon that Max drives, is the exact car that appeared in the original Mad Max. After the first film, the car was sold. The production company let it go. When Mad Max 2 was greenlit and it became clear the Interceptor needed to return, the production tracked the car down and bought it back. After Mad Max 2, it was sold again and eventually found its way to a museum in the United Kingdom. It has since changed hands multiple times and generated legal disputes between collectors over its authenticity. The car that defined the franchise was sold twice by the same people who made it famous. The wasteland runs on scarcity. Even the film's production couldn't hang on to its most iconic prop. 14. The film that invented the world. Everyone copied. When Mad Max 2 was released, the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction noted something critics and filmmakers recognized almost immediately. The film's visual language had become so widely imitated that its junkyard society of the future look is almost taken for granted in the modern science fiction action film. It wasn't a prediction, it was already true. The leather, the mohawks, the scavenged vehicles, the resource wars, the lone warrior code, the desert landscape as moral space. All of it was present and complete in 12 weeks of filming in Broken Hill in 1981. Everything that came after, from Waterworld to Fallout to 1,000 post-apocalyptic music videos, was working from a template George Miller assembled on a $4.5 million budget with a truck driver who'd never been on a set. In 2025, The Hollywood Reporter named Mad Max 2 as having the best stunts of 1981. The world it invented is still the world everyone goes back to. Which one gets you? The truck driver who wasn't a stuntman and walked out of a flipped Mac alive? The dog found at the pound the day before he was put down? Or the sand? Still the best twist ending in action cinema, sitting in plain sight the whole time. Drop it in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell. More classic science fiction and action history coming your way. See you in the next one.